Can someone really control your memories with some words only? Most people would laugh and say no. After all, your memories belong to you. Nobody can reach inside your mind and rewrite them. At least that's what most of us believe. Imagine needing major surgery. But there is no anesthesia, no painkillers, no way to make you unconscious. That's exactly what thousands of patients faced during the 19th century. Then, one surgeon claimed he had found another solution. Before every operation, he hypnotized his patients. Hundreds of surgeries were performed. Some patients remained awake, yet reported little or no pain. Doctors couldn't believe what they were seeing. Was hypnosis actually changing the human brain? Or were these patients simply imagining it? More than 150 years later, brain scanners would finally reveal the answer. But to understand how we got there, we first have to meet the man who accidentally started the entire story. But here's the strange part. Almost none of it explains where hypnosis actually came from. Because unlike electricity, steam engines, or the compass, hypnosis wasn't discovered buried beneath the earth or invented inside a workshop. It was discovered inside the human mind. Or perhaps more accurately, it was discovered after existing there all along. Every human being who has ever lived has experienced moments when attention became so focused that the outside world seemed to disappear. You've experienced it yourself. You start reading a novel and suddenly an hour is gone. You drive home and barely remember the journey. You become so absorbed in a conversation that you don't notice someone calling your name. Nothing supernatural happened. Your brain simply filtered the world differently. Now imagine living thousands of years ago. There are no smartphones, no clocks, no electric lights. Night arrives, and with it comes darkness unlike anything most people experience today. The only light comes from a campfire. Around it sits your family, your children, your grandparents, the hunters who returned before sunset. Someone begins telling a story. Not because they're trying to entertain everyone, because stories carry knowledge. They teach where predators hide, which plants heal, which rivers flood, who your ancestors were. As the storyteller speaks, the crackling fire fades into the background. The cold air disappears. Your attention narrows. Inside your mind, you aren't sitting beside a fire anymore. You're following the hunter across the grasslands. You're standing inside the cave. You're running from the lion. Your heart races even though you're perfectly safe. Modern neuroscience has a name for this remarkable ability: focused attention. Psychologists who study hypnosis, including John Kielstrom in the 1980s, and later David Oakley and Peter Halligan in 2013, describe hypnosis as an unusually focused mental state in which suggestions can influence perception, attention, and experience. That definition surprises many people, because it doesn't describe mind control. It describes something your brain already knows how to do. Think about that. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors survived because they could focus intensely on the things that mattered most: a broken footprint, the sound of moving grass, the cry of an infant, the smell of smoke carried by the wind. Evolution rewarded attention. Without it, humans wouldn't have survived long enough to invent civilization, long before anyone understood hypnosis. Nature had already built the machinery for it. But people didn't understand brains. They understood stories, spirits, gods, invisible forces. And so they explained extraordinary experiences using the only language they had. Ancient Egyptian temples sometimes welcomed people seeking healing through ritual, prayer, and dream incubation. Visitors spent the night inside sacred spaces, believing divine messages would arrive during sleep or altered states of awareness. Similar practices appeared in ancient Greece, particularly in the healing temples dedicated to Asclepius, where patients underwent rituals intended to encourage visions and recovery. Were these people practicing hypnosis? Not exactly. But historians and psychologists agree that many ancient healing rituals relied on expectation, focused attention, symbolic ceremony, and suggestion, the same psychological ingredients modern researchers recognize as important in hypnotic experiences. The explanation was supernatural. The mechanism was human. For centuries, nobody separated the two. Then Europe entered an age obsessed with science. Telescopes revealed new worlds. Microscopes uncovered invisible life. Physics rewrote humanity's understanding of nature. People began believing that every mystery could eventually be explained. One of those mysteries walked into Vienna in the form of a physician named Franz Mesmer. Mesmer was intelligent, confident, and convinced he had discovered one of nature's hidden laws. During the 1770s, he proposed that every living thing was connected by an invisible force he called animal magnetism. According to Mesmer, disease occurred whenever this invisible fluid became blocked. Restore the flow. Restore the patient. Today, that idea sounds bizarre. Modern science has found no evidence that animal magnetism exists. But here's where history becomes fascinating. His patients often improved anyway. Some reported less pain. Others claimed paralysis disappeared. Some described profound emotional relief after treatment. Word spread rapidly. Soon, aristocrats and ordinary citizens alike were seeking appointments with the mysterious physician. When Mesmer moved to Paris in 1778, his demonstrations became spectacles. Large wooden tubs filled the room. Iron rods extended outward. Patients gathered together, sometimes holding hands. Soft music played. The atmosphere was carefully designed to feel extraordinary. Mesmer himself moved slowly through the crowd, occasionally touching patients with a metal wand. Some people trembled. Some cried. Others fainted. To many observers, it looked like proof that invisible forces truly existed. But extraordinary claims invite extraordinary scrutiny. In 1784, King Louis XVI commissioned an investigation unlike anything Europe had seen before. Its members included Benjamin Franklin, then serving as the American ambassador to France, the brilliant chemist Antoine Lavoisier, the physician Joseph Ignace Guillotin, some of the greatest scientific minds of the 18th century. Their mission was simple: find out whether Mesmer had discovered a new force of nature, or whether something else explained the results. The commission designed experiments that seemed surprisingly modern. Participants were blindfolded. Sometimes they touched objects they believed had been magnetized but hadn't. Other times, genuine magnetized objects were secretly replaced. The outcome repeated itself again and again. People responded to expectation, not magnetism. In its final report, published in 1784, the Royal Commission concluded there was no evidence for Mesmer's invisible fluid. Instead, they argued that imagination and expectation explained the remarkable experiences people reported. At first glance, it looked like Mesmer had lost. History remembers something different, because although his theory collapsed, the phenomenon refused to disappear. Scientists had disproved animal magnetism. They had not explained why suggestion could change pain, why expectation could alter experience, why belief sometimes produced measurable changes inside the human body. The mystery had simply changed shape. For decades, researchers struggled with that question. Some dismissed hypnosis as fraud. Others insisted there was something genuine waiting to be understood. Then, in the middle of the 19th century, a Scottish surgeon noticed something remarkable while watching public demonstrations. His name was James Braid. Unlike Mesmer, Braid wasn't searching for invisible forces. He was searching for observable evidence. In 1843, after years of careful observation, he published Neuropnology and introduced a new word that would permanently replace animal magnetism: hypnotism. Braid argued that the phenomenon wasn't caused by mysterious fluids. It arose from the mind itself, from concentrated attention and suggestion. For the first time, hypnosis stepped away from mysticism and toward science. The journey was only beginning. Scientists still didn't know what hypnosis actually was. They didn't know what happened inside the brain. They didn't know why some people responded far more strongly than others. And they certainly didn't know that nearly 2 centuries later, powerful brain scanners would reveal something that Mesmer himself could never have imagined. If someone in 1784 had told Benjamin Franklin that one day scientists would watch the hypnotized brain working in real time, he probably wouldn't have believed it. Yet that's exactly what happened. We'll discover how modern neuroscience transformed one of history's greatest mysteries into one of psychology's most fascinating scientific questions. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you had lived in 18th century Paris, would you have believed Mesmer was discovering a hidden force of nature, or would you have sided with Franklin's commission and demanded stronger evidence? Let me know in the comments. Your eyes are open. You're reading these words. You know exactly where you are. And yet, if you've been paying close attention since the beginning of this story, you've probably stopped noticing everything else around you. The sound outside your window, the feeling of your clothes against your skin, even your own breathing. Nothing mysterious happened. Your attention simply narrowed. That's the remarkable thing about hypnosis. The deeper scientists studied it, the less it looked like magic, and the more it looked like an ordinary ability of the human brain taken to an extraordinary level. But in the 19th century, nobody knew that. James Braid had given hypnosis a new name. He had rejected Franz Mesmer's invisible magnetic fluid. He argued that hypnosis came from focused attention and suggestion instead. It was a revolutionary idea. Yet it created an even bigger mystery. If hypnosis wasn't caused by hidden magnetic forces, what exactly was happening inside the mind? For decades, nobody could answer that question. Not because scientists weren't trying, because they had no way to observe the brain itself. Imagine trying to understand how a watch works without opening it. You could see the hands moving, you could hear the ticking, but everything important remained hidden beneath the surface. The human brain was exactly like that. Researchers could observe behavior, they could ask questions, they could record memories, but they couldn't watch thoughts forming. So, hypnosis became one of psychology's greatest debates. Some researchers believed hypnotized people entered a completely different state of consciousness. Others argued nothing unusual was happening at all. Perhaps people were simply following instructions. Perhaps they were acting. Perhaps they genuinely expected suggestions to work. For nearly a century, scientists argued without reaching a clear answer. Then psychology itself began changing. Instead of asking whether hypnosis was real, researchers started asking better questions. What could hypnosis actually do? Could it reduce pain? Could it change memory? Could it alter perception? Those questions could be tested. And the answers turned out to be remarkable. One of the first scientists to transform hypnosis into rigorous experimental research was Ernest Hilgard at Stanford University. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Hilgard performed hundreds of carefully controlled experiments. He wasn't interested in stage performers. He wanted measurable evidence. One phenomenon fascinated him more than any other: pain. Pain feels absolute. Touch a hot stove, break a bone, step on broken glass. Pain demands attention. Or so we think. Hilgard wondered whether hypnosis could change not the injury itself, but the brain's experience of it. His experiments became famous. Participants submerged their hands into painfully cold water while under hypnosis. Some still reported feeling pain. Others described pressure instead of pain. Some acknowledged the sensation but seemed surprisingly calm. Their bodies hadn't changed. The water was just as cold. What had changed was the brain's interpretation. Hilgard proposed what became known as the hidden observer theory in his 1977 book Divided Consciousness. He suggested that under hypnosis, one part of the mind could experience pain differently, while another part continued monitoring reality. Not every psychologist agrees with every aspect of Hilgard's theory today, but his experiments helped establish something important. Pain isn't simply created by damaged tissue. Pain is constructed by the brain. Modern neuroscience strongly supports that broader idea. Think about that for a moment. The injury and the experience of injury are not always the same thing. If you've ever bumped your head without noticing until someone pointed out the bleeding or felt pain disappear during an intense sporting event, you've already experienced a simpler version of this principle. Your brain decides what deserves your attention. Hypnosis appears capable of influencing that decision in some people. As researchers continued investigating pain, hospitals quietly began paying attention. Could hypnosis help actual patients instead of volunteers sitting in laboratories? What about people preparing for surgery, cancer treatment, burn recovery, childbirth? Over the following decades, researchers carried out clinical trials around the world. One influential review came from Guy Montgomery and colleagues in 2000. Analyzing multiple controlled studies, they found that hypnosis could meaningfully reduce pain, anxiety, and emotional distress associated with medical procedures for many patients. Subsequent reviews, including Montgomery's later work in 2011 and research by Patterson and Jensen in 2003, reached similar conclusions. Hypnosis wasn't replacing anesthesia. It wasn't curing every illness. But when used alongside conventional medical care by trained professionals, it consistently helped many patients manage pain and anxiety. Today, clinical hypnosis is used in hospitals and pain clinics in several countries for carefully selected conditions. That's an important distinction. Not because hypnosis is magic, because the brain itself plays a major role in how pain is experienced. But pain wasn't the only surprise. Researchers discovered something even stranger. Hypnosis could temporarily change perception itself. Imagine looking at a black and white photograph and sincerely believing parts of it had disappeared, or hearing a sound that suddenly seemed quieter without anyone touching the volume. These weren't hallucinations in the way movies portray them. They were measurable changes in attention and perception. One experiment became especially influential. In 2005, neuroscientist Amir Raz and colleagues published a study examining something called the Stroop effect. The task sounds simple. You're shown the word blue printed in red ink. Your job is to say the color of the ink, not the word itself. Your brain immediately wants to read the word. That conflict slows nearly everyone down. It's one of psychology's most reliable experiments. Raz wondered something unusual. What if hypnosis could reduce that conflict? Highly hypnotizable volunteers received a simple suggestion. They should see the printed words as meaningless symbols rather than readable language. Remarkably, many participants showed dramatically reduced Stroop interference. Their brains processed the information differently. The words themselves hadn't changed. The participants hadn't become smarter. Their attention had simply been redirected. For neuroscientists, this was exciting. It suggested hypnosis could influence cognitive control, rather than merely encouraging people to pretend. The mystery was becoming clearer. Not solved, but clearer. Around the same time, brain imaging technology opened an entirely new window into hypnosis. For the first time in history, scientists could watch living brains while suggestions were taking effect, instead of guessing. They could observe. Functional MRI scanners revealed changes across networks involved in attention, executive control, and self-monitoring. In 2016, psychiatrist David Spiegel and colleagues summarized decades of neuroimaging research, arguing that hypnosis involves measurable changes in how different brain regions communicate with one another. No mysterious magnetic energy, no supernatural forces, just one of the most complex organs in the known universe, changing the way it processes information. The more evidence accumulated, the more another important fact became impossible to ignore. Not everyone responds to hypnosis equally. Some people enter deep hypnotic states with remarkable ease. Others respond only mildly. Some barely respond at all. Researchers have consistently found that hypnotizability varies across individuals and tends to remain relatively stable over time. It's a characteristic, not a measure of intelligence, not a sign of weak-mindedness. Highly analytical people can be highly hypnotizable. So can skeptical scientists. The popular stereotype couldn't be more misleading. Then, in 2015, psychologist Stephen J. Lin and an international team of hypnosis researchers published one of the most comprehensive evidence reviews in the field. Their conclusion reflected decades of accumulated research. Hypnosis is neither mind control nor mere stage acting. It is a genuine psychological phenomenon that can meaningfully influence perception, memory, emotion, and pain in some individuals under appropriate conditions. Notice what they didn't say. They didn't claim hypnosis grants supernatural powers. They didn't claim anyone can be controlled against their will. Science rarely deals in absolutes. Instead, it deals in probabilities supported by evidence. And the evidence was pointing towards something fascinating. Hypnosis wasn't revealing hidden powers. It was revealing hidden flexibility inside the ordinary human mind. But one enormous question remained. If hypnosis can influence memory, can it also change it? Can suggestion accidentally create memories that never happened? That question would lead psychology into one of its most controversial chapters. It would affect criminal investigations, courtrooms, eyewitness testimony, and even determine whether innocent people could be sentenced based on memories they genuinely believed were true. Because the greatest mystery surrounding hypnosis was never about putting ideas into someone's mind. It was about whether hypnosis could accidentally rewrite the ones already there. And that's where our story goes next. Before we continue, I'd like to hear your opinion. If hypnosis could safely reduce pain during a medical procedure, would you trust it alongside conventional treatment? Tell me why or why not in the comments. Imagine you're standing in a courtroom. The year is 1998. A woman walks toward the witness stand. She looks at the defendant. Without hesitation, she points directly at him. That's the man. Those 3 words might determine whether another human being lives or dies. Now imagine discovering years later that her memory may have changed, not because she lied, but because she genuinely remembered something that might never have happened. That's the uncomfortable truth scientists eventually discovered about hypnosis. It isn't dangerous because it controls people's minds. It's dangerous because the human mind is far more flexible than we once believed. And once researchers understood that, everything changed. For most of history, memory was treated like a recording. People assumed the brain stored events exactly as they happened. You saw something. You remembered it. Simple. But modern psychology tells a very different story. Memory isn't a video camera. It's more like a storyteller. Every time you remember an event, your brain reconstructs it. Most of the time, that reconstruction is remarkably accurate. Sometimes it isn't. Few psychologists transformed our understanding of memory more than Elizabeth Loftus. Beginning in the 1970s, Loftus conducted a series of experiments that would become some of the most influential studies in cognitive psychology. The idea sounded almost impossible. Could simply changing the wording of a question alter what people remembered? Participants watched videos of car accidents. Later, researchers asked how fast the cars were traveling, but they didn't always use the same verb. Some people heard the word hit, others heard collided, others heard smashed. One word changed everything. People who heard smashed consistently estimated higher speeds. Many later remembered seeing broken glass that had never existed. The event hadn't changed, the memory had. That discovery reshaped psychology. It also transformed the legal system. Because if ordinary conversation could unintentionally reshape memory, what happened when investigators repeatedly questioned witnesses under hypnosis? For decades, police departments around the world believed hypnosis might unlock forgotten memories. The idea sounded reasonable. If hypnosis helped people relax, perhaps hidden memories would naturally return. Beginning in the 1960s and 1970s, forensic hypnosis spread through parts of North America and Europe. Witnesses entered relaxed states. Investigators encouraged them to remember tiny details, license plates, faces, conversations. Sometimes witnesses recalled astonishing amounts of information. The problem came later. Researchers discovered something deeply troubling. Hypnosis often increased confidence, not necessarily accuracy. People genuinely believed the memories they described. Unfortunately, belief and truth are not always the same thing. By the 1980s, study after study reached similar conclusions. Hypnosis could increase the amount of information people reported. It could also increase false memories. Researchers could not reliably separate accurate recollections from imagined ones. That distinction became one of the biggest turning points in forensic psychology. Because an inaccurate memory spoken with complete confidence can be more persuasive than an uncertain memory that happens to be correct. One real criminal case illustrates why this mattered so much. On January 29, 1998, in Texas, a woman named Jill Barganier briefly observed two men outside a house where a murder would soon occur. Initially, she described one of the men as a thin white male with long hair. She viewed photographic lineups. She did not identify Charles Flores. Months later, after undergoing forensic hypnosis, her testimony changed. She identified Flores in court. The case became extraordinarily controversial because little physical evidence connected him to the crime. No fingerprints, no DNA. The eyewitness identification became one of the central issues. Legal scholars, psychologists, and courts have debated the role hypnosis may have played ever since. The important lesson isn't whether hypnosis caused the identification. The important lesson is why psychologists became increasingly cautious about hypnotically refreshed testimony. The human brain doesn't simply recover memories like files stored inside a cabinet. It rebuilds them, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. That's why many courts today place significant restrictions on testimony, influenced by forensic hypnosis. The science changed the law. But memory isn't the only myth hypnosis forced us to reconsider. Movies tell us that hypnosis removes free will. One snap of the fingers, one swinging watch, and suddenly someone becomes a puppet. Reality is much less dramatic. Throughout decades of laboratory research, psychologists repeatedly tested whether hypnotized participants would perform actions fundamentally against their moral values. The results were surprisingly consistent. Hypnosis increases responsiveness to suggestion. It does not eliminate personal judgment. People under hypnosis can refuse suggestions. They can stop the session. Many remember exactly what happened afterward. Stephen J. Lin and colleagues summarized this evidence in their 2015 review, concluding that hypnosis does not give another person unlimited control over someone else's behavior. Stage hypnosis creates a different impression because volunteers are carefully selected. Only highly responsive participants remain on stage. The audience sees the most dramatic examples. It rarely sees everyone who simply returned to their seats. That's entertainment. Science tells a quieter story. The truth, it turns out, is both less magical and more fascinating. Because hypnosis doesn't reveal supernatural powers. It reveals something about ordinary consciousness. Think about your own life. Have you ever become so absorbed in a film that you forgot you were sitting in a room? Have you driven home and realized you remembered almost none of the journey? Have you opened a book for 10 minutes, only to discover an hour had disappeared? Psychologists sometimes describe these experiences as forms of spontaneous absorption. They're not hypnosis, but they rely on many of the same attentional systems. Your brain naturally shifts between different modes of awareness throughout the day. Hypnosis appears to be one carefully guided example of that remarkable flexibility. Perhaps that's why scientists remain so interested in it. Not because they're searching for mind control, because they're trying to understand consciousness itself. Even today, after hundreds of years of research, consciousness remains one of science's greatest mysteries. How does the brain produce subjective experience? Why does focused attention sometimes change pain, perception, or memory? How does expectation reshape reality inside our own minds? Researchers continue investigating these questions using brain imaging, computational neuroscience, and cognitive psychology. Every new discovery reveals another layer, and every answer seems to produce an even bigger question. Maybe that's the most remarkable part of this entire story. Franz Mesmer was wrong. There is no invisible magnetic fluid flowing through the human body. Benjamin Franklin's commission demonstrated that more than 2 centuries ago. Yet Mesmer accidentally pointed science toward a genuine mystery, not magnetism, the human mind. James Braid removed the mysticism. Ernest Hilgard explored consciousness. Elizabeth Loftus transformed our understanding of memory. Amir Raz demonstrated measurable changes in cognitive control. David Spiegel, David Oakley, Peter Halligan, Stephen J. Lynn, Irving Kirsch, and many others continue uncovering how suggestion interacts with one of the most complex structures in the known universe, your brain. And perhaps that's the greatest surprise of all. The story of hypnosis was never really about hypnosis. It was about discovering that the mind you've carried your entire life is stranger than anyone once imagined. It can reduce pain without changing an injury. It can reshape perception without changing reality. It can strengthen confidence without guaranteeing truth. It can become so focused that the world briefly fades into the background. Not because your mind becomes weaker, but because attention becomes stronger. Long before scientists built MRI scanners, long before psychologists designed experiments, long before Mesmer walked into Paris believing he had discovered invisible forces, your ancestors already possessed this extraordinary ability. They used it while listening to stories around ancient fires, while tracking animals across open landscapes, while teaching children through imagination. The mechanism never changed, only our understanding did. Today, hypnosis is no longer viewed as magic. It isn't evidence of supernatural power. It isn't proof of mind control. According to modern scientific consensus, it is one of the most fascinating demonstrations of how expectation, attention, and suggestion interact inside the human brain. And that may be even more extraordinary than the myths that came before it. Because the greatest mystery wasn't hidden inside an invisible force surrounding humanity, it was hidden inside humanity itself. Before you leave, I'd love to know what surprised you most. Was it Mesmer's story, the Franklin Commission, the neuroscience, or the discovery that memory itself is far less reliable than most of us imagine? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. If you know someone who still thinks hypnosis is just stage magic, share this video with them. They'll probably be just as surprised as you were.